Hello and welcome to the Family Brand Podcast. My name is Chris. I'm a husband, a father, and an entrepreneur.
My name's Melissa, and I am a wife, mother, former nurse turned real estate investor.
And we believe the greatest gift you can give your child is a last name that stands for something.
Your last name is your family's brand.
If you are a parent who wants to raise your child to know who they are, love who they are, and believe in who they are, this show is for you.
We promise to bring you real and authentic conversations with parents and experts who are committed to making their family their life's most important work.
This show will help you take a stand for your family and to raise your children by design, not default.
This is the Family Brand Podcast. Chris and Melissa, welcome back. We just got back from an incredible weekend in Cabo, we facilitated and co-hosted a couples retreat. And we wanted to talk today about some of our big takeaways from that incredible weekend that we had in Cabo.
Yeah, and it was, we have never done something like this. Our really great friends, Dan Martell and Renee Warren, asked us if we would co-host it with them. And we love them, love their family. I don't know how long you've been following along with the podcast, but last summer we went to Europe for 6 weeks. And part of that, we were on a boat in Croatia with some families. Dan and Renee and their two boys were one of those families. And
they went through Family Brand.
Yep. And they went through Family Brand about a year and a half ago and had a really cool experience with that. So we just love them and love their family. And they have been getting asked, I guess, by their community for quite some time to put on a couples retreat. Melissa and I have talked about it over the years. And so it was kind of fun for both of us, to say like, yeah, let's do it together. So we had 10 couples who came. And, I would say that all four of us, Melissa, myself, Dan, and Renee, had a high degree of confidence that it would be really transformative and it'd make a difference. And we'd never done it before, but it was really encouraging because at the end, I think almost every couple was like, well, when's the next one? Aren't you guys going to make us an offer for the next couples retreat? And so we are going to do another couples retreat for what it's worth. So if you have any interest, reach out to Melissa on her Instagram and we'll add you to the wait list. But I think the thing that I would want to say first that was most inspiring to me about the couples retreat is seeing 10 couples who are willing to proactively invest time, money, resources into the strengthening of their marriage. Mm-hmm. And sadly, I think in our society, that's a foreign concept. Like I think a lot of times we make reactive expenses in our relationship or in our family once there's a problem, right? Counseling, therapy, rehab, even divorce. And there's a usefulness in those resources, obviously, and they serve a purpose. And I wonder sometimes, would we have as much need for counseling, therapy, rehab, and divorce attorneys if we made more proactive investments in the building and strengthening of what we have now? And I had this thought over the weekend that proactive investments almost always beat reactive expenses. So I think that was the first big takeaway. And you've heard us say this on the podcast before, and that is, look, as a couple or just as a family overall, you're either intentionally growing together or you are accidentally drifting apart. There's not really a middle ground. And look, all of us, no matter how intentional you are, there's going to be times where you drift apart, but I think it's how long, right? Like maybe you drift apart for a day or for a week or but I think the more and more we drift apart, it can get to where it's like kind of dangerous, where you don't even really know each other anymore. You don't feel like you know each other and you just kind of feel like you're roommates. And so I think more than ever, especially with everything that's going on in the world, it's like super important to proactively invest intentionally in the strengthening of your marriage and your family.
And we've talked about this on an episode before, but I think sometimes it's just accepted that, we're busy right now, so our relationship is going to take a backseat to the kids or to work or whatever else it is. And I think that that's a mistake. Like, I think if there's at any point where you realize like we're not intentionally growing together, that right there is the opportunity to rethink and maybe reprioritize and never accept like, look, this isn't our season right now.
And there may be seasons where it's like easier or more convenient to proactively invest and do it more often. But I think that's a really great point.
In full disclosure, we already recorded this episode before this, and we had so many takeaways that we were trying to share on the episode from this weekend. It ended up feeling kind of all over the place. And so we decided, okay, we are just going to share 5 big takeaways from this weekend. And so that was the number one, just this idea of intentionally growing together versus accidentally drifting apart.
I think that's also something you could just, as a takeaway, if you stopped listening right now, is what could we do to proactively invest in the strengthening of our marriage? Like, where are there opportunities for us to do that? And that could look like going on a couples retreat to Mexico. That could also look like, hey, we're going to go on a date once a week, or we're going to go on a date once a month, or we're going to have this created time every day. But yeah, where can we proactively, intentionally invest in the strengthening of our marriage?
Okay, our second takeaway from this weekend is the importance of spending time with families or couples who are inspiring to you or who you aspire to be more like in one way or another. And I think it's really beautiful when it feels that way for both couples, where you both feel like you're elevating and inspiring the other, and you're both wanting to influence the other to be better and to, just be more of who you can be.
Melissa actually covered this. So the way the couples retreat worked is I covered a session, Melissa covered a session, Dan, Renee, and then we had a lot of open interaction. That was also really cool. Like I learned as much from the other couples there as what they do, that works in their family. And I learned a ton from Dan and Renee. But this is something that Melissa actually talked about in her session. And this is one of the things that we did to rebuild our marriage. So Melissa has this really amazing post on Instagram. If you want to go find it, maybe we can link it in the show notes.
We did an episode on it before too.
Okay. Yeah, we'll link both.
Link to it.
Melissa used to get asked all the time, how did you rebuild your marriage? So for those of you who maybe are listening for the first time, we were separated 15 years ago, going to get divorced. Obviously didn't. Rebuilt our marriage. We've created something really beautiful together. Not perfect, but we actually like each other, like our family. But people would ask her all the time, well, what did you do? And I think she got tired of not having like a very good answer. So she sat down with me one time, like, okay, what did we do? And we went back, and there were really 8 critical things we did. And one of those things was we made it a point to be around other couples who inspired us, who either had strong marriages or were working towards having strong marriages. And I think it's kind of that idea of you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so that was just like really eye-opening, I think, to a lot of couples of like, yeah, there are couples who inspire us. It would take some intention. It would take some work. That won't just happen, which I think feeds into the third big takeaway we had, which was, I think Dan calls this in his SaaS Academy business, he calls it the preloaded year, which is kind of like planning your year a year in advance of like, what are the experiences we're going to have? What are the trips we're going to go on? And then they also make a list, and we've done this before as well. Who are the families and the couples that we want to do life with in a big way, right? More like these bigger trips. And then who are the couples and families in our local area that we want to do life with, like date nights and weekend just hangouts and spending time together on the lake. And so I love that idea, because the more intentional you are at identifying the couples and families that you want to do life with, the more likely it is that that'll actually happen. Because I think all of us have great intentions, but putting that as part of your planning for the year, it's just so much more likely that you will spend more time around couples who inspire you, and your children will be spending time around those couples and their children. Like one of my highlights for the entire week was so the first part of the week we stayed at a really fun resort. And then the second we moved to a different resort for the couples retreat.
For spring, it was spring break. So we brought all the kids with us.
Yeah. And so it was, the first resort was all inclusive. So there's these restaurants that you could eat at that actually had really great food, and a huge plug for this resort. If you ever want to go stay at a really fun all-inclusive resort that has great food and a fun lazy river. And I go to lunch one day and I look over, and our oldest son, Tate, and Dan are sitting by themselves having lunch. And I made the point not to go over there and interfere or get involved, because I was like, for those of you who don't know much about Dan is incredibly successful in business, incredibly kind and just generous. And, Tate is, an aspiring entrepreneur. And, I just love having other men and women who pour into my kids. And so it's just like, yeah, who are the families and the couples that you want to do life with? And you can do life with them. Like, you can have a lot of fun, whether that's in your local area where you live, or you can do some big adventures together.
And Dan and Renee really broke down their process. Maybe I'll share it really briefly here. And it looks like, I think for them, it's like Chris kind of identifies some families that he feels like would be one of those families he would want to spend more time. Renee identifies families that she feels like would be those families. And then they compare notes. And it's like, okay, where does the overlap lie? Because sometimes maybe it's like, I really enjoy hanging with the wife, but maybe Chris doesn't resonate as much with the husband or vice versa. And so it's really getting on the same page of like, who are the couples that we both want to spend more time with and the families we both want to spend more time with.
And we've actually, another thing is we've included our kids in that conversation a number of times when we've identified families. We ask our kids, like, who are some families that you want to get closer to next year, make sure that we spend time with. And it's just, yeah, it's awesome.
We did this a few years ago, and it just remind me of, there was like, we had the privilege of having some amazing friends who have just been such dear friends to us, over 20 years of marriage. And when we were doing this one year, we realized that there was a couple that we hadn't hung out with like for a really long time. And we realized we love them. Like, why have we not made an effort to spend more time with them? So even that was kind of cool to like reminisce and remember like friends that we wanted to bring back into our lives that had maybe fallen out for one reason or another. Okay, and the fourth thing, so we have intentionally growing together, spending time with people, couples who inspire you. Number 2. Number 3 is planning your year in advance. And number 4, I'm going to introduce it and then let Chris talk about it because this was something that he shared during his session, and he talked about this authentic conversations framework. And I heard so many people talking about it. Like the rest of the event, people kept like referring back to it and saying like, oh, I tried this out and it really worked. And what that authentic conversations framework is just, it's this idea that there's conversations in your relationship that you're probably not having. And this can go, Chris applies this in business, even this can apply to any relationship that you have. But, in this setting, we were talking about couples specifically, but what are those conversations that you are not having, and that the growth of your relationship actually lies in those conversations? Will you share a little bit more about that and what that framework looks like?
Yeah, I've seen it in our marriage. I've seen it in the marriages of lots of other couples that have been through Family Brand and just friends. And then I've seen it a lot in companies. There's a significant cost to the conversations you're not having. And I've found in companies almost all of the potential for growth and impact in people and also even in revenue and profits, it's actually locked up in the conversations you're not having. And a lot of the potential for your marriage, no matter how good it is to become even better, is again, a lot of times like kind of trapped in these conversations we're not having. And so the question becomes, well, why aren't we having them? And I think there's 2 reasons primarily that we see in companies and also in relationships, families. The reason people aren't having them is, first and foremost, we've taught them as we've framed them up as like hard conversations, awkward conversations, difficult conversations. Like how many times have you been told or heard, oh, you got to have the hard conversation, got to have the difficult conversation, got to have the awkward conversation. And we believe language creates. So it's like, well, I don't want to create that. Like, why does it have to be hard? Why does it have to be difficult? Why does it have to be awkward? And so instead we've created this language called the authentic conversation. It's like, let's just have an authentic conversation. So I think that's one reason we don't have them as often as we would like to, or maybe even feel like we should, is because there's just been this like energy around it that's going to be hard or awkward or difficult. And then the second reason is like, because no one's ever taught us how. Like we've been taught our entire lives to have that hard conversation in your marriage, in your business, in your team, in your partnership, but no one ever teaches you how. So if we can remove the barrier that they don't have to be hard or difficult or awkward, they can just be authentic. And 2, if we taught people how, and so we created a framework to teach people how. And it's just called the Authentic Conversations Framework. And the first thing that I think happens a lot of times in these conversations is people have the best of intentions when they go to finally have it. Well, first and foremost, oftentimes way too much time has passed from the issue to now the conversation. And so that issue that's been rolling around out there without a conversation is kind of like a tumbleweed, which attracts a lot of other stuff that doesn't belong in it. So it's emotionally charged. So by the time you do have it, it can feel really like someone's being attacked or you're being attacked. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid a situation where we don't want either party to feel attacked. We don't want anyone to have anything to defend. And we don't want to have anyone made to feel wrong or bad. And so if we can like not attack someone or have someone's identity feel attacked, not have them feel wrong or bad, it dramatically increases the likelihood of success. And so I don't know how many of you, besides Melissa and I, have ever started the conversation off with, well, you always, or you never. Those don't tend to go very well. Like whatever you say after you always or you never is pretty much a dumpster fire, right? It's over. We might as well stop. Because if I say to Melissa, like you always or you never, without knowing it, I've attacked her identity. And like that's scary for people. People don't like to feel like their identity is being attacked. Because if you're attacking my identity, I almost feel like I have no other option but to defend myself and dig in and be like, oh, you're not going to attack me. And then another thing that I think we do unintentionally is when I go, you always or you never, whatever I say next, there's sometimes I can say something that would actually have Melissa feel like she's wrong or she's bad for having done it. So I put a lot of unnecessary emotion and energy towards it. And then the third thing we see is like, so even if you have the conversation that goes pretty well, most people leave with like a fuzzy expectation of what's going to happen next. So the likelihood of it just repeating itself is really high. So how would we do the opposite? So I'm going to share with you some really specific language that we teach that you could use. Instead of coming to Melissa and say, hey, you this or you that, I can just share from my perspective. And this is exact words and exact phrasing we teach, which is, hey, Melissa, lately it seems like, or hey, lately it kind of feels like. And the power in those simple words is I'm not saying this is who you always are. I'm not saying this is how it's always been. I'm saying, hey, lately it seems like, or hey, lately it feels like. I'm also not attacking her identity. I'm actually talking about me. Hey, lately it just seems like, hey, lately it feels like. And so, for example, I could say, hey, Melissa, lately it seems like, you're kind of frustrated with me. And then I've learned the hard way, a really powerful thing to do next before I go any further, say, is everything okay? Because like a lot of times it's not okay. They're struggling with something over there, or like, who knows? And just that alone sometimes can like diffuse everything. And it's like, so a really safe place to come from is like, hey, lately it seems like, hey, lately it feels like. And first and foremost, I just want to know, like, is everything okay? And then if I say like, about the frustration, we talk whenever, and I say, so yeah, for me, like, I just don't think it works for you to be, this frustrated with me. So this idea of working, not working is really profound, because otherwise I kind of have to like say like, well, you shouldn't be doing that, or I wish you wouldn't do, it's like almost like you're wrong or you're bad for doing it. But if I can say more around like, hey, here's why I think that works, or here's why it doesn't work. So like the idea of working, not working, again, takes a lot of the emotion out of it as well. So, hey, lately it seems like, whatever it is, are you okay? Is everything okay? Hey, here's why I think that works, or here's what I think could work better. And then the final piece is like, can we create a really clear agreement about what we could do different or what I could do different? And so, I mean, this is something that when we go into companies, we teach it like for months, but it's amazing. Like it's miraculous, the miracles that start to happen when there's just a freedom at which we can talk and we don't have to let a lot of time pass. And one couple asked something that like, I was so happy they asked it, because every team asked this. They're like, well, isn't this going to be super awkward? Because we all know the authentic conversation framework. And we're like, we feel like we're using it on each other.
Yeah, it's very scripted lately, it feels like.
It's like, wait, you're using the thing on me that Chris taught. And I said, I actually wondered that at first myself, but it's actually been the complete opposite. If anything, it actually creates kind of a lightheartedness around it, and it kind of diffuses it. And we've had tons of teams that we've consulted and coached will actually say, oh yeah, when someone comes to me and says, lately it seems like, I actually appreciate that they're wanting to have an authentic conversation with me. And I'll even joke sometimes like, okay, so we're going there, but you can have fun with it. I also think that another way to look at it is, if someone comes to you wanting to have an authentic conversation, acknowledge how much courage that took and really grant them some grace. And then the last thing I would say, and this is something that I think requires a lot of intention and effort, is on the other side, you're the person receiving it, is we really encourage people to strive to be as unoffendable as possible. Easier said than done. But I really believe that if a person is empowered to have an authentic conversation using these principles, and the other person is striving to do the best they can to really hear and be unoffendable, yeah, it's just miraculous, the performance you can have in your relationship.
We even had one couple that came back the next day and said, hey, I tried that last night and it actually really worked.
Yeah, we have teams all the time, like blows their minds. Like we had a company recently we were consulting, their culture had gotten to the place of like almost like toxicity. Like it gotten that bad. A lot of gossiping, backbiting, unhad conversations. Like it was not great. And we just went in there and introduced this idea of the authentic conversation framework, striving to be unoffendable. And the business owner is like, we've gotten hours of our time back each week just because we're not wasting time anymore. Our productivity's up, our revenue's up. He's like, and he said, we're having conversations I never could have imagined us having one-on-one, much less like in a group. And so, it does require some courage, but yeah, that was a big takeaway that I think a lot of people had.
Yeah, it really was. And the thing that I think is cool about it is that can apply to, like I said, any area where you may be having a challenge in your marriage.
Or with kids.
Or with kids.
How often do we go to our kids and say, hey, lately, you always, or you never? We get after them. And anytime you get after a child, their natural human instinct is to defend and dig in. And so this is where it's so great with when I can remember to do it with our kids is just like, hey, lately it seems like, is everything okay? Hey, lately it kind of feels like, is everything okay? Then I could talk to my kids about, hey, here's why that works, or here's why it doesn't work, and here's what might work better. Can we get into a really clear agreement? It just works.
And then the fifth thing is something that we already do, but I liked how it was maybe presented in a new way by Dan and Renee. And that is this idea of using, we call it a word of the year, which, you've heard us talk about before, but they call it an anchor word. And we just really liked that visual of an anchor. Like the anchor is what is you're holding yourselves to that word the whole year, and just the power of that. What would you add?
I would also say that for us, the anchor word kind of grounds you, because it's easy throughout a year to lose focus, or it's easy throughout the year to kind of get off, kilter or routine, and you just come back to like, oh yeah, this is what's important to our family this year. And that I think is also important. It's not just a random word. It's like you really put some thought into this, and look, it's not too late, by the way, if you haven't chosen one, but you put some thought into this at the end of the year, heading into towards the next year. Like who do we want to be next year? Like what do we want to experience? What's important to us? What do we think our family could use the most help with? So that word is there to anchor you. And we also think about the word as like a set of glasses or a lens that you put on to look through as you make decisions. So like you might look through that anchor word or through that lens to be like, well, who are the families we want to spend time with next year? Or internationally or outside of our area, and then also locally. But I can just tell you that it might be surprised how much of an impact a single word or phrase that if you anchor to it, it can really help you be way more intentional about the year as a couple and as a family.
And in fact, it came up for us a couple of days ago. We were having our weekly family meeting. We were talking about, we started doing a book club a couple of years ago, and we were having this discussion of we haven't done our book club yet this year. So let's start doing our book club, but what book do we want to start with? And we remembered, okay, what's our word this year? Which is actually a phrase, but it is get that dog in you.
Which for those of you who don't, that's a slang term that's like, get that dog in you, like get gritty, get tough, right? Like
put in the work.
Yeah, put in the work. So that's our anchor theme or word for the year.
And so we use that as the lens to choose what is our next Smith Family Book Club book. And that's just one example just a couple of days ago of how that's shaping our experiences and our family this year.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think Melissa said, like we had to reshoot this episode because the other one we tried to share way too many ideas and it got all over the place. But I think the point though is we'd have never stumbled upon any of these had we not actually been at the retreat. So I think more than anything, again, it's like you don't want to accidentally drift apart. Like you want to intentionally grow together. And I'm just grateful for Dan and Renee. I'm grateful for the other 10 couples who came. I'm grateful that people want to come back and do another one. And the next one will be even better. So if you are interested or have ever wanted to attend a couples retreat with some really cool couples, reach out to us. We'd love to put you on the waiting list for the next one. I think the first one literally sold out in a day. Like within a day, all 10 spots were filled. We'll probably add more spots for the next one, but yeah.
Jump on my newsletter. Go to my homepage, familybrand.com, and then just jump on the newsletter. And then the last thing I want to add is that, just really open my eyes also this retreat to the fact that sometimes you just have to get out of your day to day. Like, I feel like our day to day is so full of just logistics, like running kids' places, running a business, just taking care of the house. Sometimes we don't have the space to have these deeper conversations about who we are as a couple and where we're headed, and some of these authentic conversations as well. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of space, like pulling yourself outside of the day to day, and that something like a couples retreat or a date night or a little getaway that really facilitates those conversations, I think, a lot more easily sometimes. So yeah, that's it. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening to the Family Brand Podcast. To say thank you, we have something really awesome we'd love to share with you.
We often hear from families who will tell us that they just feel so overwhelmed because of the demands that are placed on them. They feel like they're constantly being pulled in so many different directions and spread thin, and they're spending time as a family, but they don't feel like it's quality time. They're not really connected, and they want to be more intentional. And we can certainly relate because we felt like that at one point in our family. And so we created a guide that allowed us to really be more confident around how we spend time as a family and what we say yes to and what we say no to. And it's just brought so much more peace into our home. It's made our lives so much more simple. And we want to share it with you. So if you go to familybrand.com/free, you can download the How to Take Back Your Family's Time guide. And I can promise you it'll give you more confidence and more peace in your life and in your family.
One last thing, we feel so inspired when we hear from families that we are making a difference for them. We would love it if you would leave us a 5-star rating and a review on the podcast so we can reach even more amazing families. We truly believe that the way we change the world is one family at a time.